Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. Princess Rayla, Part 3. Rayla sighed as she laid alone in her bed, the extra blankets and pillows doing little to replicate the warmth she was missing. The news that Zadia was in turmoil over her wasn't helping her lack of sleep. As she rolled over, she heard a gentle knock at her door that caused her to sit up, confused over who would be there in the middle of the night. Before she could ask who it was, the door opened and a dragon stepped in, smiling in the dim candle light that illuminated the room. "Ah, here you are." "Callum? What are you doing?" "Looking for you, silly," he chuckled, closing the door and walking over to her. "I've been sitting in our nest waiting for you, but you didn't come, so I came to find you instead." He yawned as he sat on the edge of the bed, then climbed in with her, smiling as she moved over to make room. "What are you doing in here anyway?" "Madame Chatti says it's not appropriate for us to sleep in the same bed before we get married." He gave her a half-amused, half-confused expression. "Does she know we already... you know?" "If she does, she never said," Rayla mumbled as she quickly snuggled into his side, groaning blissfully. "I missed this." "Me too, Rayla. I haven't slept in 4 days." "Well, get some rest now." "Thanks, and don't worry. I'll have a word with Shaky. There's no way we're sleeping on opposite sides of the palace." Silently, the pair held each other and gradually drifted off with the familiar warmth, sense, and love from one another. Even as the sun rose, Rayla stayed where she was, snuggled into the shoulder and neck of her dragon. Not wishing to disturb him, she just watched his chest rise and fall, counting the scales on his neck and chest. Slowly, she felt him stir, and his tail flicked her ankle where it had rested for the night. He yawned, showing off his sharp fangs before staring at her with a smile. "Morning." "Morning," she whispered back, stretching out beside him. "So, what are your plans for today?" "To make contact and arrangements to meet those who are against us," he explained with a whisper. "I don't want Zadia to end up at war with itself, so I need to handle this delicately." And it all rests on me," she added softly, feeling her stomach drop. Callum sensed her uncertainty and turned to her, smiling and kissing her brow. "Once they meet you, they will know we are meant to be together," he whispered into her ear before kissing and nipping at the tip. "They just need to understand." Smiling, she rose and grabbed him, pulling him in for a kiss and pressing him back into the pillows. As Callum groaned and his hands reached up to remove her nightdress, the door opened without a knock, and Madame Chatsey walked in with a tray of food. "I hope you are awake, Lady Rayla. We have a lot—" She stopped when she turned to the bed and noticed the pair, the elf straddling the dragon. Callum just smirked. "Madame Chatsey, good morning." Good morning, Your Highness." Rayla quickly climbed off him, blushing with pure embarrassment at getting caught. Callum sat up. "I wanted to speak to you, actually. What is all this about Rayla not sleeping in my nest?" "Your Highness, it is not appropriate for the two of you to—" "Rayla has slept at my side since the day we met. Just because we are in a palace and not the forest does not change that," he said with finality. "Rayla can keep this room if she wants, but it is my personal request, as Crown Prince, that she be allowed to sleep where she wishes. Be that here or in my room. Understood?" There was a slight pride in Chatsey's eyes as she bowed to him. "As you say, sire." "Good. Now that that's cleared up." He turned to the elf in the bed beside him and took her hand, kissing the back. "I'll see you tonight. Do your best." Squeezing the hand in her grasp, Rayla nodded. "Tonight." Letting go, the prince turned to the other dragon. "Teach her well, Madame Chatsey." "Yes, Your Highness." she said with another bow, turning to the elf when he had gone. A slight smile crept onto her lips. "Sleep well?" "Very," Rayla replied with a smile of her own. "I'm glad to hear that. Now, shall we get to work? With the prince intending to present you to his opposition, we need you to be flawless." "I know," she sighed, climbing out of bed. "Let's do this." Nervous didn't begin to cover how Rayla was feeling. Years of training to be an assassin had done little to prepare her for this. If anything, it made it worse. Her training told her to hide in the shadows and disappear out of sight. With her current outfit, she wouldn't be able to hide anywhere. Day to day, she'd worn elegant but simple dresses with slim skirts and minimum jewels. But for this dinner, she was in a dress with a skirt made to hang away from her body in a dome. That's when she first saw it. She honestly thought it was a tent. Her hair was still filled with silver clasps and jewels, and silver beads on her horns were adorned with small green gems. Her markings were now in delicate swirls and twists, more detailed than her normal style. Queen Zuiba had even lent her one of her crowns for the evening, a simple silver band with a green stone in the middle. For something so light, it weighed heavy on her head. She was currently in the room adjoining the main dining hall of the palace, staring at the door that separated her from the 19 elves and dragons that had openly objected to her union with Cadmondius. There were many others out there that objected, but they had refused to come. "Rayla?" A comforting voice questioned from her side, holding her gloved hand. "Breathe, love. It's going to be all right." Gradually, she released the breath she had been holding, her gaze shifting to him. He had his crown on his head and golden bands on each horn. He donned a formal blue jacket with a white shirt under his cloak. The clasp a sparkling emblem of the moon primal to show his devotion to her. He smiled softly, lifting her hand and kissing the back. "We can do this," he told her with confidence in his voice. "Ready?" His confidence filling her, Rayla nodded and held his hand. The dragon smiled, then turned to the doors, straightening his wings and back. He raised his head and took a breath before stepping to the door, which opened before him. On the other side, Evis raised his head. "Announcing Prince Cadmondius of Zadia and Lady Rayla of the Silver Grove." While this was the first time she was announced as Lady Rayla and being the center of attention, it wasn't the first formal dinner Rayla had attended with Callum. She had become used to certain things happening when the prince entered a room. Normally, everyone around them bowed, saluted, or did something when he passed them or arrived. But this time, everyone turned to glare at them. After a moment, when she thought she was going to throw up, Rayla took a few steps into the room and looked around at the various elves and dragons. A long table was set for each person to sit at. Callum was also nervous, but he hid it a lot better than Rayla did. Standing tall. "Thank you all for coming here tonight. I appreciate you agreeing to meet with us." He paused, looking at each of them. "I understand that each of you has issues with my intended union to Rayla, and I am glad you have given me the chance to set things straight." "So you'll break off the engagement?" someone shouted. "No," he replied quite sharply. "I will marry Rayla, even if you do not approve. But my intention tonight is for you to understand why." "You can't say anything to convince us that an elf and a dragon belong together," someone else shouted from the back, the rest mumbling in agreement. Callum clearly took a deep breath to steady himself, Rayla squeezing his hand as he did. He paused for a second, then looked over the attendees. "Zadia is changing. All around us things are changing. The borders between the human lands in Zadia is open. Free travel is law. The kingdom of Catalyst has an elf on its crown guard. Lux Aurora has a human as their golden knight. Even my own dragon guard is now a combination of elves, dragons, and variants. We cannot say the world is the same as it was, because it isn't." "My own village of Silvergrove has accepted a dragon to live among them," Rayla spoke up, her voice clear and sharp to them despite her nerves. "And as many of you know, Moonshadow Elves do not like outsiders, but they have allowed this dragon to live with them. If we deny change, we deny future." "It's all well and good, living and working with dragons and humans. We can cope with that," an elf shouted out. But you intend to marry an arch dragon. It's unnatural." "Is it?" Rayla asked, having prepared herself for this argument. "Is it unnatural?" "Yes, a dragon and an elf should not breed together." "Then why is a dragon able to change form and walk among us? Why are they not stuck in their draconic forms?" she questioned back. "If it is unnatural, why can variants be born? Why is the magic within each of us allowed to create new life together?" The elf who had spoken out opened his mouth, but then frowned and looked down. Taking a breath, Rayla stepped towards the middle of the room, the jewels on her dress jingling slightly as she walked. "You say you object to my union to Prince Cadmondius, but can any of you name a reason why we shouldn't be together besides our species?" The group mumbled lowly for a moment. Then someone stepped forward, a skywing elf with his own wings. "Because you are nothing important. You are a simple elf, unworthy of a king. You're just using him." Rayla turned to the speaker, then glanced at Callum, who was clearly doing everything in his power not to lash out at the elf. Somehow he managed to calm down with deep breaths. "How much do you know of the time I was assumed dead?" The Skywing frowned at the odd question. "You were held prisoner by a human mage. He used you for dark magic." "Yes. What else?" What else? What else did he do to me?" Rayla blinked as she looked at him, knowing where this would lead. If she didn't need to show her own strength to them, she would have hurried to his side to support him, but instead stood away. The Skywing shook his head slightly. I don't know." The prince took a moment to gather his thoughts, then nodded. "When I first woke up in that place, I was chained to the wall by my hands and feet. Over the years, as I grew, the human added more restraints until I could barely move. I couldn't sit, I couldn't walk, I could barely raise my head. And that man would beat me. He never needed a reason to. He would just strike me for whatever reason he wanted. I was trapped in a room with no window, no sky, or flowers, or trees. There was a crack in the wall where I could feel the wind sometimes, but that was it. I was starved and left with nothing but pain and fear. He paused, then looked at Rayla. Then she came. She came to that room and freed me. He smiled softly. She and King Ezran freed me. They got me out and told me it would be okay. And I knew they were telling the truth. In that single moment, I saw the world was not just pain, fear, and hatred, but kindness and compassion. He turned on the spot, looking over the others. Rayla healed me. She took my hand and told me it would be all right. She gave me courage and strength and asked for nothing in return. She guided me home and she protected me every step of the way. I would not be standing here today if it wasn't for her. I would not be the man I have become if it wasn't for her. I love her with all my heart, and I'll be darned if anyone is going to take the only true happiness I have away from me. The others in the room glanced at each other for a bit, but then one stepped towards Rayla. And you? How do you feel about the prince? The elf stared at the speaker, then slowly shook her head. He's not the prince to me, she replied, a smile coming to her lips. He's Callum, the goofy, silly, strange dragon I traveled across the human lands with. The dragon I found that was so scared he wouldn't let anyone touch him, but he trusted me. He's the dragon who was once terrified of magic because he feared it was evil. Yet he changed and became someone so powerful that all of Zadia now looks to him. I saw him bitten by an Antiqua snake and poisoned, yet he still used magic to save me. Even when he knew it would weaken him. He's selfless and kind, and he has such a sweet tooth it's crazy sometimes. And yes, he has his flaws. He acts before he thinks and has a temper sometimes, but he's amazing. She turned and looked over at her prince. I have been privileged to know him in a way no one else ever would. I've seen him at his weakest and at his strongest. I've seen him scared and full with wonder. I've seen him laugh and cry. I've seen him through nightmares and watched him play in the rain like a child. He's never been Prince Commandius of Zadia to me. He's just Callum, the man I fell in love with. She lowered her gaze, smiling at the words. I thought my only duty was to get him home, to protect him. But before I knew Commandius was alive, and I was sent to avenge his death, I made an oath under the full moon. I swore my heart for Zadia. She paused, looking over at the prince's smiling face, and I kept that oath. I gave my heart to Zadia, to its future, and its king. The dragon walked over to her and took hold of her hand, kissing the back of it lightly. But his eyes were on hers, filled with a want to do so much more, and her own smile mirrored the same.